Have you ever wondered if a seemingly simple decision to leave everything behind to start a new life could lead you to the depths of fear and unimaginable brutality? A letter full of hope, a promise of a simpler future in the Wild West, and a man you've never met. Sarah Peterson, a woman from Boston, boarded a stagecoach, carrying with her a desire to live. But what awaited her was not a warm little home, but an empty cabin, a trembling piece of paper with just 2 short words. Help me. In today's video, you'll join Sarah on a dramatic transformation in the fierce landscape of 1888, where the Montana frontier is not only a harsh land, but also a place where deadly secrets are buried. We'll discover a story that's not just about love, but also about survival, about unexpected courage, and a mother-daughter bond that transcends blood ties. If you love historical stories that are mysterious, dramatic, and heart-wrenching, you're in the right place. What you're about to experience is more than just a narrative. It's a challenging emotional journey that will have you laughing, worrying, sobbing, and then unable to look away. Like if you believe that humane, powerful, and profound stories like this deserve to be shared, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future journeys. And leave a comment if there's a moment that makes you choke up, because the quietest voices are sometimes the ones that need to be heard the most. For now, take a deep breath, because we're about to enter a world where promises are broken, truths are buried, and one lone woman rewrites destiny with her own courage. Boston, 1888. In a city of strict rules, old expectations, and the dry rhythms of the upper classes, a woman is withering. Sarah Peterson, in her 30s, has been taught that a woman's life is measured in teas, handkerchiefs, and finally, in the quiet devotion at the bedside of her elderly aunts. But she can't bear the prospect of being confined to wooden rooms with faded floral wallpaper and the steady ticking of a grandfather clock. Number. She wants more. Not wealth, but meaning. Not fame, but freedom. And when the first letters from Thomas Miller arrive plain, honest, she sees a door. Montana. The very name suggests something vast, wild and promising. A man she had never met. A small farm, a life of independence, and a chance to be herself. Sarah boarded a stagecoach, leaving Boston in silence, carrying only a trunk, a few dresses, a Bible, and a soft old photograph of the man she had trusted. The long days of shaking on the bumpy trail had worn down her body, but each shaking also extinguished a part of the illusion she had carried with her. Because the closer she got to the Wild West, the more the truth was revealed, not through words, but through the empty eyes of her fellow travelers, through the harsh silence of that land. When the stagecoach stopped, Sarah had to pull the trunk down herself, no one to greet her. No greeting. Only a log cabin loomed in the middle of the barren land, standing silently as if long forgotten. Miller's place, the coachman said hoarsely before turning away, leaving her alone with the wind and dust, with a loneliness she had never known. The cabin was smaller than she had imagined. No smoke from the chimney, no sign of life. Sarah stepped down, the wind whipping her face, carrying a dry, unfamiliar smell of dust. The door was ajar, rattling in the wind, as if wavering between welcoming or repelling the stranger. "Thomas!" she called, her voice echoing, and then fading into the vastness. No response. The cabin was eerily quiet. The faint light filtering through the small window illuminated a dusty wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. The smell in the air made her pause, a metallic, rusty smell, or blood. She took a deep breath, trying not to let her imagination overwhelm her. Maybe Thomas was just outside, she told herself. Maybe he didn't know she was there. But every little detail in the room began to whisper otherwise. The rough wooden crib lay quietly in the corner, covered with a small, pale blanket. No dust, no cold, as if it had just been used. In the crib, under the covers, was a small piece of paper. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it. The words were scrawled hastily, as if written in the dark. "Help me." The cry for help was like a knife, cutting into everything she believed. Thomas had never mentioned a child, never mentioned anyone but himself. Every word in his letters had been about a future for the two of them, a home, a garden, peace. But that crib, that note, was an accusation that he was hiding something. The air in the cabin was heavy, as if holding the breath of someone who had just left in a hurry. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for some other piece of evidence, however small. A cold fireplace, an unmade bed, and then a small object lying near the wall. A necklace. A silver locket, old and simple. Sarah picked it up, feeling cold, heavy. She couldn't open it, but her instincts told her this was a woman's thing, not Thomas's. The cradle, the note, the locket, the smell of blood. Everything seemed to tell a story, but there was no storyteller. And Sarah's fear slowly took shape, not as a ghost, but as a tangible reality. Someone had lived here, a woman, a child, and they were in danger. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, torn apart. She had come here to start a new life, to find freedom. But what she found was a cry for help from another life. Each beat of her heart echoed in the silence, echoing the imaginary cry of a child she had never met. The cabin was no longer a shelter, but a terrifying question mark in the vastness of the land. She didn't know what had happened, but in her heart, in every nerve that trembled with cold and fear, Sarah knew one thing for sure. This could not be the end. This was the beginning. And the truth, however cruel, awaited her to follow every trace in the call of the Wild West. The road to Harmony was not paved with roses. After a panicky first night at the cabin, Sarah packed the bare essentials: a nearly empty water bottle, some dry food, a silver locket, a note for help, and set off on feet unfamiliar with the rocky terrain of the West. Heading toward the place the stagecoach driver had mentioned, she pinned her fragile hopes on Harmony, a small town she had never seen, known only as a dot on the map in Thomas's last letter. The sun was relentless, beating down on her hatless head, through her frayed skirts from the dust and thorns of the road. The fatigue turned to a dull ache, then to numbness. But the one thing Sarah couldn't do was stop. She couldn't allow herself to stop, not when the Childiff he was still alive and needed her. And inside her, there was still a bleeding wound. Thomas, the man who had made her believe in a future, a promise, was now not only absent, but possibly a lie. When Sarah arrived in Harmony, she found herself the center of attention without asking. A dirty woman, lost in a rough, dusty town, where women walked behind their husbands or stood behind bars. She did not belong here, and the villagers' eyes said it more clearly than any greeting. But she had not come here to fit in. She had come to find the truth. The general store stood out as a sign of order amid the chaos. Inside, the light from the windows illuminated the silver hair and folded hands of an old man, only person in town, who did not seem to be looking at her with a critical eye. "Good afternoon," he said first, his voice hoarse but not gruff. "Lost, young lady?" Sarah did not answer immediately. She straightened, swallowed the thirst in her throat, and said clearly, "I am Sarah Peterson. I am from Boston. I am here to marry Thomas Miller." Silence fell like a curtain. The old man looked up, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose, his eyes staring at her with undisguised surprise. "Thomas Miller?" he repeated slowly, as if to make sure he had heard correctly. Well, just that short sound was enough for Sarah to know that something was wrong. "Do you know him?" she asked, her voice low, almost pleading. "Yes, but Thomas is married, girl, and has a child. The baby is 6 months old." The words were like a hammer blow to Sarah's chest. She clenched her fists, trying to keep her face calm. "But he wrote to me, promised, said he lived alone." The old man sighed. "Thomas is a good man, but not infallible. His wife Marte's quiet, strong. They live out there, but he hasn't been seen in the shop lately. Usually he comes every few weeks to pick up things." "Len." Sarah quietly held out the note and the silver locket. "I found this in the cabin. No one was there. No sign of life except the cradle and this letter." The old man's eyes softened at the sight of the object. He took the locket, turning it over and over. "This is Martha's. There's no mistake about it. And the note, good heavens." He placed his hand lightly on the table, his eyes looking far away. If so, something very bad has happened. Martha wouldn't have left unless someone did something to them, Sarah added, her voice laced with anger now. She had come to marry an honest man. Instead, she was in the middle of an unresolved tragedy. Maybe, he said slowly. A few weeks ago there was a stranger named Silas, tall, thin, with a nasty look in his eyes. He asked a lot about the homesteads near the river, especially Thomas's. "Will anyone help?" Sarah asked, her eyes fixed on him. "Sheriff Brody. He might know more. He's in the bar at this hour." As Sarah entered the bar, the air was thick with the smell of alcohol, sweat, and cigarettes. Once again, she was the focus. But her eyes quickly fell on the large, sunburned man with a glass of whiskey in his hand, a police star pinned crookedly to his chest. "Sheriff Brody." "Are you Brody?" she asked, her voice strangely calm. "I am," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Sarah put the note and the locket down on the table. "I'm Sarah Peterson. I went to Thomas Miller. The cabin was empty, and I found this." Sheriff Brody studied the evidence, frowning. "Martha's," he said softly. "Damn. Do you know what happened?" Sarah asked, her voice quick. "Was she kidnapped? Did someone hurt her? And where is Thomas?" Brody shook his head. "We don't have enough people to check all the homesteads. There are rumors, people missing, but this is the West. It could have been Indians, or wild animals, or the land just swallowed them." "The land doesn't write letters for help," Sarah said, looking straight at him. "A woman with a child wrote. And what are you going to do?" He looked at her and saw in the thin woman not a forsaken bride, but a small burning flame. "I'll send someone to check in the morning." "Not enough," she said. "I'll go, even alone." He didn't answer. He just pushed an old map toward her. "There's a poacher's trail north of the cabin. If someone was running away or being chased, they would take that path." Sarah took the map, looking him straight in the eye. "I can't let that child be forgotten." In that look, Brody understood. No one, not even him, could stop her. And behind the softness, Sarah was a person forged in pain that didn't make her run, but made her the only one who dared to turn back. And the question gradually formed in the audience's mind. Will she find them before it's too late? And who is Silas the stranger in this story? Before the sun had even risen above the hills, Sarah was on horseback. On Dustith, rustic horse, she'd traded for the only precious thing she'd brought. She carried not only food, water, and the small gun the grocer had insisted on giving her, but also her unwavering determination. The tattered map Sheriff Brody had given her yesterday was clearer than ever, the pencil marks of the trapper's trail illuminating a single direction. Find Martha and the baby, alive or dead. She wouldn't let herself think that. The trail led her off the main road, into nameless country, where the grass grew as high as her horse's calves. The wind whistled softly between the steep cliffs that stood like ancient ruins. Sarah was breathing heavily, not used to the saddle or the pressure of the journey, but she didn't stop. Every little sign along the way, a broken branch, a deep mark in the ground, was a signal. And then she saw it, a small wooden toy horse, old and bent, lying on its side in the grass. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Unmistakable, a child's, and had the child taken it with him when he fled? Nearby, a few footprints in the dry dirt, a pair of large ones, a pair of small ones. And then, something dark. Sarah bent down, sniffed. Iron, blood, dried, faded, but unmistakable. Her heart pounded like a drum. Someone had been hurt, someone had fought, and they had left quickly. She gripped the hilt of her gun, cautiously moving deeper into the canyon ahead. Dusty stopped, breathing heavily. A figure sat by a small fire, sheltered by a few large rocks. Thin, head bowed, flipping through a worn leather book. Him? Silas? Sarah drew her gun immediately, but did not cock it. She crept along the edge, pressing her body against the rough surface. The fire crackled, the smell of thin gruel and wood smoke filling the air. The man coughed a few times, a dry cough as if his lungs were failing. There were no ropes, no guards. No one else was around. She stepped closer, her gun shaking in her hand. Then, a movement. Silas turned. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and for a moment Sarah saw not a kidnapper, but a man whose time had eaten away at him. His eyes met hers, and instead of being startled or frightened, Silas simply nodded. "You're the girl from Boston. You're after me?" Sarah asked, the gun still raised. "I'm after Jed," he said, his eyes looking away. "The one who's holding them." She squeezed the trigger. "Who's holding who?" Silas pointed northeast, where the gorge narrowed, where the wind howled like the whispers of the dead. "There's a place, a cave. He's there with the woman and the child. I was going to wait until nightfall to break in." He sniffed, laughing dryly. "But now I don't think I have the strength." Sarah didn't answer. Inside her was a whirlwind. There was no right or wrong, only a feeling, a burning intuition that this was the time. She heard on the wind, something broken, fragile, a cry. There was no mistaking it. Without waiting, she tied Dusty to a nearby bush, stuffed the locket and toys into her bag, and held her gun steady. Silas struggled to his feet. "I'll come with you." "You'll slow me down," she said. "I need to run." The cave wasn't far, but the path to it felt like a trap. Every turn was a shadow, every step an echo. Sarah could barely breathe, her ears straining to follow the growing cry. Then she saw it, a makeshift tent made of torn canvas, built in the middle of a ravine. And before it stood the man, huge, broad-shouldered, holding a wooden staff stained with dried blood. His eyes were bright in the darkness. "Jed." Sarah backed away, but her foot struck a small stone, making a dry sound. Jed turned, eyes like blades. "Another fly," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came for the land too?" Sarah raised her gun. "I came for the baby." Jed sneered. "You can't shoot. That gun was just for scare." He took a step forward. "Thomas owes me. He escaped. He's dead, or hiding. His stupid wife fought back. Now it's just the baby. And now, you." The wind howled through the ravine, carrying a soft sob. Sarah swallowed. Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't. "I won't let you hurt the baby." Then together. Jed roared, charging forward. A noise sounded behind him. Silas. Weak as he was, Silas rushed in like a shadow. The small knife flashed. Jed roared, turned, swung his stick, but hit a rock. Sarah didn't think. She rushed in, fired. The shot rang out, missed, but stopped Jed. "Lily!" Martha's voice rang out from the hut. "Take her." She rushed in, saw Martha lying curled up, her legs swollen, her eyes wide with pain. She handed Lily to Sarah, her lips trembling. "Please." Sarah didn't hesitate. She picked up the baby, wrapped her in a thin blanket, and turned to run. Behind her, there was a struggle. Silas gasped. Jed roared. Lily cried out. Sarah held her tight, running as if her life depended on her steps. When she reached the place where Dusty was tied, she jumped on her horse, tied Lily to her belly with an old woolen scarf. She didn't look back, but in her heart she knew Jed was still alive, and Silas might have fallen. She urged Dusty on, the sound of her hooves pounding the hard earth like a drum. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The smell of blood, the sound of her crying, the look in Martha's eyes, all of it echoed in her mind like knives. She hadn't come west to be a mother. But in that moment, she knew, you don't have to give birth to be a mother. You just have to have a little life to protect, and she was the only one who could do it. That night, Sarah Peterson, the slender Boston woman, the deceived letter bride, had ridden the Black Desert with her child in her arms, her heart pounding in her chest, into a whole new destiny. Blood had been spilled. The truth had been revealed. But the big question remained. Could she keep Lily safe? And would Martha, the mother, who had given her child up in despair even, be alive when dawn came? That night, Sarah did not dare stop until the eastern sky began to glow with a thin pink on the horizon. The darkness was fading, giving way to pale copper across the prairie, and the rasping breath of Lily in her arms was the only sound that pulled her from her exhaustion. When a thin wisp of smoke appeared in the distance, a sign of life, of hope, Sarah steeled herself, her heart filled with a last hope. The cabin loomed at the foot of the hill, surrounded by a few small vegetable plots, simple and cozy, like a dream that dared not be named. The woman who opened the door was an old woman with silver hair, small in stature but standing as straight and steady as an old tree. She said nothing when she saw Sarah with the trembling child in her arms, only nodded silently and held out her hand to take Lily. Inside the house, which smelled of pine and hay, she boiled water, warmed the baby, and laid Sarah down on a wooden chair by the fire, as if accustomed to receiving lost souls. Her name was Ara, a widow who had lived alone for nearly 30 years, without children, but whose heart was as big as the sky above her roof. Sarah told the story, every detail, her voice trembling and broken, as if fear still clung to her every breath. When she finished, Ara did not say a word of pity, but simply squeezed her hand and said, "You have done what few people can, and now we must do the rest." Ara sent her only surviving son, Caleb, a young man with clear eyes and a weak voice, riding back to Harmony in the early morning. Sarah sat beside Lily, watching the little face stop crying, falling into a deep sleep after a long nightmare. The baby slept in her arms as if it were familiar, and strangely enough, Sarah did not feel strange. It seemed, from the beginning, that they were destined to meet in this harsh land. When Sheriff Brodie and a few kind-hearted townspeople arrived, the look in his eyes was no longer doubt but genuine concern. He bowed to Lily, now wrapped in a clean blanket, then looked straight at Sarah. "We'll bring them back," he said, "and this time I'm coming with you." They returned to the canyon that afternoon, no longer afraid but prepared and determined. Sarah went with them, despite everyone's advice to stay, but she knew this was not something she could just stand by. When they found the makeshift shelter, Jed lay there, unconscious, dried blood caked around the wound in his shoulder. Nearby, Silas leaned against the rocks, his face pale but his eyes still alert. He didn't say much, just looked at Sarah and whispered, "Is she safe?" She nodded, her eyes stinging. Martha was found exhausted, her leg broken, but the wound had been carefully fixed with pieces of wood and tied with rope by Silas himself. The man who had been suspected of being a bad guy was the only one who risked his life to keep mother and child alive. When the group returned to Harmony, Sarah walked beside Martha in the carriage, her hand holding hers like a rope connecting the scattered souls. Thomas did not return. On the way, they found a crevice in the rocks that showed signs of a struggle. A handkerchief embroidered with his name lay under a bush, blood and footprints. No one spoke, but everyone understood. Thomas had fought, had distracted Jed so that his wife and child could live. Sarah sat silently by the pile of rocks where he was believed to have fallen, her eyes dry. No tears, only a sense of loss that spread like the sunset over the hills. Jed was held captive, not resisting. When he woke up, he looked at Sarah for a long time, then smiled faintly. "You're like Thomas," he said. "You believe that kindness can save lives." Sarah didn't answer. She turned away, not because she was afraid, but because she knew she didn't have to answer to someone like him. In the weeks that followed, Sarah didn't return to Boston. She stayed with Martha, with Lily. Ara helped them rebuild the cabin, with Silas now slowly recovering, but still a helpful hand. The early days were hard. Little water, limited food, dry land, but they had each other. Sarah helped care for Lily, learned to boil water over dry wood, mended clothes with scraps of cloth, and planted rows of small beans in the backyard. She was no longer the fragile woman in the silk dress from the east. She was part of the Westhard, quiet and steady as the wind blowing across the prairie. Late one afternoon, as the sun poured gold over the newly shingled roof, Lily toddled across the dirt. Sarah sat on the steps, watching, holding the locket that had been returned after the investigation was over. Inside was a blurry image of Martha and Thomas, smiling together. Sarah smiled, not bitterly, but peacefully, because now she understood Thomas had not called her here to marry him, but to continue what he had not been able to do, to keep this little family alive. And most of all, she had found her own family. Sarah no longer counted time by the holidays or the news from Boston. She counted by Lily's laughter every morning, by the wind through the wooden roof, by the planting of seeds. And at night, in the flickering glow of the fireplace, she told their story of Martha, of Silas, of the brave father who had died, and of the mother who had come from far away to become the backbone of a family that bore no blood, but was bound by courage and love. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but in that little house on the prairie, there was one thing that was unshakable: hope. And for Sarah, that was all she needed to go on. Not as a survivor, but as someone who had chosen to stay, to love, to heal, to start over from the ashes. Not because she had been chosen, but because she had chosen to be. Sarah Peterson's story does not end with a wedding or the ringing of church bells, as in the dreamy letters from the East. It begins with a simple home, the laughter of a child who is not her blood, and the profound silence of a woman who chose to stay. Stay to face her pain, to turn loss into strength, and to transform an abandoned cabin into a place where new hope is born. We often think of heroes as people with guns, on horses, bravely charging into battle. But sometimes the hero is a frail woman, her hands shaking as she first holds a gun, but she keeps going because she can't turn back. Sarah didn't come to the West to be a hero. She came to escape her old life. But it was this harsh place that shaped her into someone no wonder not even herself could have imagined. She didn't save the world, but she did save a child. And in Lily's eyes, every morning when she wakes up, she sees the greatest reward of all. Meaning, if you've been with Sarah on this long and emotional journey, thank you. This story is more than just a retelling of a Western. It's a reminder that kindness, no matter how small and quiet, can light up the world. Let us know what moved you the most. Was it the moment Sarah first found the crib with a cry for help? Was it the moment she held Lily and rode off into the night? Or was it Martha's eyes as she handed her baby over to a stranger who trusted her? Please share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your feelings, because each person who hears this story will carry with them a part of themselves, maybe sympathy, maybe empathy, or simply a sigh in the midst of a busy life. If you believe that emotional, authentic, and evocative stories like this deserve a place, please like this video. That small action helps us continue to bring more stories, other journeys, maybe on the battlefield, a poor kitchen, or a letter that has turned the color of time, all of which are the silent yet powerful heartbeats of humanity. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to continue accompanying us in the next stories. Here, we don't just tell stories, we inspire, we connect. And we believe that sometimes a story, if told at the right time, can change the way we see the world. Thank you for listening, and if possible, please retell this story to someone who needs to hear it. Who knows, somewhere there is a woman like Sarah, quietly stepping into the light from a seemingly inescapable darkness.